Welcome to another episode of Corporate CPR, where we breathe life back into your organization, projects, and processes, giving you insights to recovery and avoiding corporate mortality events. Today, we'll be talking about how playing it safe might be killing your company. And joining us to contribute to the conversation is John Miller. Welcome, John.
Hi, Jana. Great to be here with you.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you. Can you share a little bit about your background?
Sure. I'm the founder and president of Scribewise. We're a content marketing agency, mostly serving B2B companies, some really complex businesses. I like to say our team thrives in complexity and understanding, at least to the level that we can, the complexity of our clients, and then turning that into information and content that appeals to an audience. So our team is made up of writers, strategists, and designers. So all of those things go together to create the content. It's not just about the written word, although that is typically where we start.
Excellent. Well, can you share a little bit about what a lot of companies do and what you mean by playing it safe within marketing?
Sure. So the book we published earlier this year that I wrote is called Playing It Safe Sucks, a Courageous Marketing Manifesto. And one of the chapters in the book is called The Uncertain Times Fallacy. And we've been living in uncertain times for quite some time, Jana. And everybody uses that as a bit of an excuse to play small ball or to do nothing or to play it safe, to do something vanilla. And for those of us who got into marketing, I would argue that our purpose, the purpose of our careers, of our jobs, of our companies, of our departments, whether you're in-house or at an agency, is to do something that makes the company stand out and build credibility and trust. And if you're just playing follow the leader and doing what everyone else does and playing it safe, you're doing a disservice to yourself, to your company, to your department, and you're really not fulfilling your mission. So the idea of playing it safe is I think it's a huge problem. I think it fits exactly in with the main theme of this podcast, because it's easy to play it safe. It's easy to play it safe as an organization gets larger, because a lot of times people might have bold ideas, but they can't bring them to fruition because there's internal politics, because fighting through the red tape becomes difficult and they tend to give up. And the book is very much kind of a rant to say, don't give up. Figure out how to bring these great ideas to market.
I think a lot of, obviously there's a lot of risk, right? And that's where, and that's where you find across the board that a lot of people struggle is really thinking about what is the real risk, right? Because I think we inflate risk due to fear. And I don't know, yes. How do you suggest that a company actually weed through the noise of what's fear and what the real risk is?
That's a great question. And one of the things I like to say to people is that people and their companies is it's not always the right time. Like sometimes it is the right time to play it safe. It depends, right? There's a context. That can be personal. You don't want to take personal risk because your kids are going to college next year, or just the state of the business, et cetera. So you have to figure out like what's the right time, and then figure out what's the way for us to do this. And it does very much start internally with conversations, with someone being a champion, with having almost a political campaign internally to get people on your side. It's not just, I say courageous does not equal crazy. It doesn't mean doing some wacky thing to get attention. Because you can get attention and not build the trust and credibility. And people say, oh, though that's the crazy company. I would never hire them, but I did notice their marketing. So it's really, it starts with that internal knowledge, understanding your company's self, I think is the first thing to do.
And then how do you understand, I guess, the market and when it's ready? Like you mentioned timing. So how do you assess the right time? Like what are the components of that?
I would argue that it's we can talk ourselves into doing nothing, right? So I'm saying to everybody, don't do that.
Mm,
So my bias would be towards assuming it's the right time.
mm-hmm,
Now, there could be an example could be, well, we can't build up a huge amount of demand because the supply chain in our industry is completely jacked up. And if we do build up demand, we can't deliver. That's a problem, right? Um, as I said, we're mostly in the B2B space. Once upon a time, though, we did a campaign for a company that sold artificial Christmas trees. And people who want an artificial Christmas tree want it now.
mm,
And so we built a lot of demand, but they had those trees come over from China. They were stuck on a boat, like stereotypical supply chain thing. And it was a waste of time. We had great stuff. We built up a huge audience and it failed because the supply chain failed. So to have the knowledge of can you deliver is important. That's just a bizarre example that popped into my head. You have to know those things.
yeah, absolutely.
But when the head of supply chain or the CFO or whomever is saying we can't take a chance right now, I would argue that it's marketing's job to not just say, okay, fine, but to press the point. And I think marketers, we tend to be overly agreeable sometimes. And sometimes we should push back and stand our ground. And I don't think we do that all the time.
Mm.
And the CFO or the head of sales, they have numbers on their side. But marketers have numbers too. Like the opportunity cost that you might be giving up is really important to consider. You have to be able to talk in those terms, and you have to be able to stand toe to toe with those folks who might be naysaying. Uh, and I think we shy away from that as a marketing community.
All right. Do you have other tips on how, how marketing can really effectively communicate with, cross organizationally to get across their vision? Because, I think, like you said, sometimes it's hard to um, quantify results because there's a big unknown out there.
Yeah, it starts small. I know that seems contrary to being courageous, but start with an experiment and then prove it or disprove it.
Mm-hmm.
But you're more likely to get an opportunity to do a smaller experiment with a smaller budget and then obsessively track how it's going, which requires knowing the right metrics. It's not necessarily website traffic or something simplistic like that. Um, can you reduce your sales cycle if you have a long consideration type of a sales cycle? Those types of things. Prove that over time, and then you'll get more and more budget, and to be able to expand a program. Um, but then you do also have to find champions within the organization. It can't just be a solitary voice because that's not going to win. So it's not like you're tricking people into going along with the idea, but find people who can understand the vision for what you're trying to do, and get them on your side, and build your army, even if it's a small army internally, and then do those little experiments, start to prove it. So being courageous does not mean we're going to go buy a bunch of Super Bowl ads and spend gazillions of dollars. It's how can we start to change the way we go to market, if that's what's needed, if it's actually change. Um, and culture is a huge part of that too. One of the things you have to do before you start doing this is assess the culture of the organization. If nobody in the C-suite is a risk taker, it might not work. That might not be the right time. It might not be the right job for you if you feel like you're a courageous marketer. So you have to
Mm.
take all of those things into consideration.
How do you, you know, I assume part of being a courageous marketer is actually cutting through the noise. The point of it is to cut through the noise and, like you said, not be vanilla like everyone else. What are the components that go into analyzing what that looks like for your company and how you even, stand out among, a cast of thousands.
Right. In the book, I talk about the 4 pillars of courageous marketing, which are
Mm,
knowledge, understanding yourself, understanding the market, understanding what might work, um, confidence. So building up confidence um, in what you might be trying to do,
mm,
which is that kind of internal politicking, which I know sounds very negative, but I don't mean it that way. But or doing the small experiment, like building that confidence. Action, which is coming up with the idea. There's 2 parts to action: coming up with the idea, which could be different messaging, different channels, different tactics within the existing channels. There's lots of different variables within that, but it's what works for your corporate personality,
mm.
which to me is your brand. Like you
Right.
can't be off brand, right? It needs to align with your brand, or at least align with the best version of your brand. Action is putting it out into the world and figure like what is the best way to do that. Um, what's the best way to be aggressive with that, even if it's aggressive in a very narrow niche, which that's the experiment part perhaps. And then evolution, because you're not going to get everything right.
Mm,
So you have to iterate it forward and not make evolution an excuse for chickening out, because a lot of times we do that. We've done that. So he's like, let's turtle back up because people are saying mean things about us or whatever. So, so within that confidence too, you're fortifying yourself internally and externally. Like the slings
mm.
and arrows are going to come if you're doing something different. People are going to roll their eyes. But if you have confidence in it, which is data based confidence, like we know this is the right thing, we feel this in our collective gut. So we will hold firm when those slings and arrows come.
What do you think? What would your advice be to non-marketers on how to, if my marketing person came to me with a plan and it was maybe it did look a little scary because, like you said, it's courageous. How do I, as a non-marketer, what are the things that I need to be looking at to evaluate whether I should get on board or not with the plan?
I think it starts with, do you trust the person and the
Mm,
department? If you don't trust the person or the department, that's a different, more drastic conversation potentially, right?
mm,
And it depends on it depends on the lifespan of the company and where you are and all those things too, right? Like you might say, we just need to do this for now. We just kind of hold steady, whatever. So it might not be the right time. Um, but I think it's an openness to ideas. It's a willingness to push back and play devil's advocate against those ideas. But ultimately, it's a question of whether or not you trust the individuals who are proposing this to you. Um,
mm,
it should be collaborative. It's not a sequential thing. It's
mm-hmm,
I think any great marketing campaign or initiative is inherently messy when you're trying to put it together.
mm.
We have to let the chaos happen a little bit.
So how do you move from chaos to clarity?
Oh, it's simple. It takes 3 days, and no.
No, yeah. Follow this
um,
10-step program.
it's I mean, a lot of it really is a matter of the company's culture. Um, and it's, have you built a culture where everybody is collectively looking for the best answer, not
Mm,
their answer, not their way, but is everybody opinionated but respectful and have the mission of the organization in mind? Um, and I think if you don't have those things lined up, it's very hard. You can't just snap your fingers and we're going to do courageous marketing in 2024. You have to, it has to be your organization might need to do some work on itself first.
mm. And so what are the things, I guess, that go into that? You've talked a lot about, and I guess I don't want to go to marketing, necessarily marketing 101, but you were talking a lot about, you've got to know your voice, you've got to know your brand, you need to do all of these things so you can confidently go out there and be courageous. What are some of those components? Like, obviously a marketer is going to know those things, but what about the rest of us? What do we need to know about that? Or what are our contributions to that process, to make sure that our marketing team can be on point, with the tone and voice they're going out to market with?
As you're saying that, asking that question, I'm thinking there's a quote that just about every marketer knows, from Ben Horowitz, fairly famous venture capitalist, which is, your story is your strategy. So, and marketers believe that. I don't know if everybody else believes that, but the concept there is that a company that has its story straight, that has alignment throughout the organization. If you read Good to Great or any book of that ilk, what makes all of those companies great is that everybody internally and externally knows what the business is all about. They understand what it stands for. That's the essence of your story. And I think marketing needs to drive the storytelling aspect of that. But the best executives, leaders create a company that is aligned from top to bottom. That's extremely hard to do, obviously. But it's knowing what you are, knowing what you aren't, being very aware of the competition, but not so much so that you've changed direction every time the competition changes direction. It does get into a leadership exercise, really.
Yeah, well, and it's very difficult, at least I find, to get between the sales team and other executives that are kind of externally facing and marketing, all telling the same story. Because I guess that maybe this is more, we tend to talk to, on this show, to organizations that are larger, and so maybe this is more of a smaller company problem, but because it's coming from a different perspective. And so, like, we have different, let's call them practice leads within our organization, and their story is slightly different because their focus is different. Right. And so to bring that into a cohesive story for sales or marketing to tell, sometimes I find that the story's slanted. And I don't know if you ever see that, but.
Oh, yeah. And that's fine. But what's the umbrella story that it all aligns up to? And I think an easy example is, what does Nike stand for? They don't stand for sneakers. They don't stand for shorts or golf clubs or baseball gloves. They stand for athletic excellence. Everything ladders up to that. And it's not all about elite athletes. It's about weekend warriors, but making the elite athlete elite and making the weekend warrior the best they can be. That's what all of their marketing is about. All of their advertising is focused on the greatness of trying to be athletic.
Right.
So there's a commonality between all of your different practice groups, but the way they bring it to market and the way they actually interact with clients, I'm sure, is different. But there's absolutely, whether it's your process or your belief or your commitment to one specific aspect of the work you do, there's almost certainly some commonality there. The one exception that you often find is law firms, because that's like, consulting firms are different, I think, but law firms are often, like, big law firms to me are often collections of solo entrepreneurs.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, until I think you get really big, right? And then they're probably more like a consulting firm, but
well, yeah, maybe.
And consulting's an interesting one. It might be fun to talk about a little bit, is that, like, for us, right? Well, so you take a traditional consulting firm, you think of the big four, I guess we won't name names, but, to me, they come across as uber professional, very stuffy, always wearing suits. And that might not be what they do as individuals anymore, but that's the brand or that's what, like you think about Nike and you think about just do it, you think about action, you think about, like that, but that's not what you think about with the big four, and so one of the things like we try to balance is how do you sound professional and competent, but also sound approachable and human and maybe even have humor, right? Like we don't have to just be stuffy. We can have humor. So what are your thoughts, I guess, about, because maybe in some ways that's a little bit paradoxical, right? Like, oh, these guys are funny. Do we trust them or something like that? Do you have thoughts around that?
I do 100% because we have a client, one of our favorite client, maybe our favorite client, that's a boutique consulting firm. And we help them figure out their brand. We've done everything. We built their website, figured out their brand, their story, written a ton of content for them that's been distributed on social and wherever. It very much and it is, I would say, a more casual. The tone of everything we create for them is more casual, but it's also very confident. And it has the confidence to be casual. So, it fits with the personality of the people who work there in the organization, right? It's not like the people don't walk into the room and everybody who's read their client that has read the blog post is like, who the hell are these people? That's not what happens. There is an alignment there.
Right.
So, and that has to exist. And then if that's not the company's personality, it wouldn't work. So
yeah, we would never show up in suits. So yeah.
Right. But you are who you are, right? And you presumably are confident about it.
Yeah.
So your marketing should reflect that. It should, if you guys wear jeans, your marketing should wear jeans, metaphorically, right?
No, that's a great metaphor. What we've done a lot on the show around marketing, and I find that maybe it kind of it slants a little to the B2C. So curious, what are the things that are different about B2B marketing, and what are some of those key fundamentals that people should know? Because sometimes it's harder to, in my opinion, reach your buyer.
There's different flavors of B2B for sure, right? So, but typically B2B is a much longer consideration cycle. Not always, but if you're SaaS companies, maybe not, depending on if it's kind of self-service SaaS. But the biggest thing to me is it's not transactional. So we're not selling, our clients are not selling socks.
Right.
So what website traffic to me, and everybody in B2B still obsesses about SEO and driving people to their website. And I would argue that you really don't need it. You have to take care of the fundamentals. It's not a big deal. In fact, we have a piece on our website called the SEO delusion, in which we say you're focused on the wrong thing. SEO is overprescribed, and everybody spends way too much time thinking about it. Because if you're a mid-sized consulting firm and you've got, I don't know how many clients you have, but you have 25, 50, 100 clients, you don't need thousands of people on your website. Most of your business is probably coming from referral or word of mouth or digital word of mouth more and more. So you do need to have a certain level of activity in order to supercharge those efforts. But all of your, and I think especially a consulting firm or a law firm, unless it's like a personal injury law firm, your job, marketing's job, is to build trust at scale.
Yep.
Not to get attention. Build trust at scale. So everything you do needs to build that trust. It needs to, so like, again, I won't mention the big four either, but the big four, I'm sure, have dozens of people working on SEO Everybody knows who the big four is. Anyone who's going to hire the big four knows the big four.
Mm-hmm.
They don't need SEO at all, I would argue.
Right. Right.
So I think it's so B2B versus B2C. To me, it's just, it should not be stuffy. It should be as accessible as possible. You should need to acknowledge that you're creating the marketing for humans,
Mm-hmm.
but you should not be as, it's typically not as transactional.
Hmm. When you talk about courageous marketing, how does that translate to the dollars? Like, how do how are they deciding where to put the dollars and where to take a risk on a new channel? Or, yeah, what are your thoughts around that?
I think, well, I hate the fact that my answer is it depends, but it depends. So,
Yeah, but philosophically, I'm sure it depends. But what are some of those thoughts that go into the it depends?
it's, well, it's where is our audience?
Mm-hmm.
How, and if they're not if they're not on TikTok, if we're talking B2B, how much are we willing to invest to change their muscle memory to get them onto TikTok? To me, that's a daunting, and I know there are B2B marketers on TikTok who swear by it, but that's a daunting task for an accounting firm.
Mm.
But I'm sure there's an accounting firm somewhere doing a lot of stuff on TikTok and it's working for them. So can you be TikTok's accounting firm and kind of own that space? You can if you go to something new. But not so long ago, everybody was aghast at Twitter as it became X, and then Facebook rolled out Threads, which
Mm-hmm.
nobody remembers. It was not that long ago. People got all excited about it. Companies grabbed their Threads domain. It's a waste of time.
Mm.
So, if you're going to go to, exploring or a brave new world, is it going to last? You don't have to do it that week.
Right.
So I think those are the considerations. I think the primary one is, where is your audience?
Mm.
And if you're going to consider going somewhere where they're not, can you get them there? That's hard to do.
I would assume the secondary question, because we've actually had this conversation specifically about TikTok, is why do people go there? So, because we've talked about what do we look like on TikTok if we're putting energy there, and the conversation with between myself and the marketing team was that, well, people go to LinkedIn for different reasons than they go to TikTok. So if we're going to TikTok, it needs to be about advice, or it needs to have some humor, but humor that still connects to our brand, because people don't go to TikTok for the same reasons they go to LinkedIn, so the tone has to be on brand, like you're saying, but it needs to be different, like than who we're speaking to on LinkedIn. I don't know if you have observations there.
I think it's hard to find that line, but yeah, if you can find that line, great. I think I think it's hard. I mean, we haven't advised any of our clients to go to TikTok.
Fair enough.
And so I like it. It seems like kind of a crazy extreme example. I do know that there was some B2B activity there, obviously, but it's something. If you're going to do it, it's how do you find, like, so it's the TikTokization of your brand. So it's a little bit more
Right.
bite-sized. It's a little bit hipper. But if you can't pull off the hit, like, that's the worst thing, is if you're not funny or you're not, and I'm not saying either of these things about you,
Right.
but if you're not hip and you're not funny and you try to be it, everybody cringes and it's terrible and it's a negative.
Right.
So can you pull it off? That's
Well, because
what you have to, and that takes a self-assessment, right?
Yeah, because I reflect on myself, right? So when my TikTok feed, what pops up there, I do like to listen to a lot of leadership advice, right? And I like to see those things. And so that's where I'm thinking, oh, if we may not be advising like on the consulting things that we normally do, but if you're doing this advice, um, people might be intrigued by you and you might be continuing to build your credibility, and that might lead to something else. Although I suppose that's the question is, you might gain a great following because you're giving all this great leadership advice. Maybe you're giving tips and tricks about other things, but maybe that never actually converts to anything because you're not actually out there, pushing what you're selling.
Well, that's leads to a great point, which is um, if you're on TikTok, your primary goal is not to sell stuff, it's to build a community.
Right.
Um, and how much can you own that community? Like how much can you control it, or could TikTok take it? And that's happened on social platforms, God knows, right? Like they change the rules and boop, you like, or your audience is still there, but you being active there now costs 5 times as much
Mm.
because Mark Zuckerberg decided that over the weekend or whatever.
Right.
So
Right.
those things can happen. Or the Chinese Communist Party decided that it's going to cost 5 times as much.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's a consideration.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're able to build a community wherever you can build it, that's really hard to do these days.
Mm.
Um, because all of the platforms, two things are happening right now. None of the platforms want people to leave their platform. So if
Right.
you put links in your posts on LinkedIn, they will perform worse than if you didn't have a link in it. LinkedIn punishes posts with links.
Mm.
So you have to acknowledge that. So we're actually creating a lot of content for our clients and ourselves that doesn't link outside of LinkedIn. Now we're having all of our activity now within LinkedIn. A little bit scary because we don't control that fully. But the platforms are doing that, but also consumers, decision makers want to consume content where they're consuming it. They don't want to go to your website either.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
which is another reason why the obsession to drive people to your website is misguided in this day and age. So, how can you build the holy grail is getting people's email addresses,
Mm.
but people don't want to give up their email addresses either. So
No.
it's really hard to build community. Can you create a Slack community? It depends. Again, it depends on your audience and where they're at and how savvy they are and what they do. There's been an upsurge in groups like Pavilion, which are kind of thought leadership communities, and people are becoming more active. People and companies are becoming more active in those. So it's how can you build a community? You also don't need thousands and thousands of people, right? You need the 100 raving fans. That's what we all want. So how can
So
you accumulate those people?
so because it was always drilled in to me, and now I'm not a marketer, I'm a casual consumer of marketing, understanding marketing, but is that, oh, you always have to have a strategy of where you want them to end up. So like you were saying, you have links in there because you always want it to go back to a website or a blog or whatever, and then you have some call to action that you ultimately want, right? But so if you're going to perform lower on social media if you're including links, and like you're saying, if your audience isn't going to want to leave those, what's your objective then? Or has it changed, or should you still be doing that anyway despite the performance?
Um, Something like 80% of the B2B buyer's journey happens before your salesperson or your uh, whoever's going to close that deal for you knows that the person is in market and looking. That
Mm.
could take weeks, months, years, depends on your company. They could be following you. They could be consuming your podcast for years. You don't even know who they are. And then they call you up out of the blue.
Mm.
So we're unfortunately going back to a world in which we don't have the same line of sight into our prospects' behavior. So if you can get their email address, if you can interact with them, that's awesome. But that's our desire as the person selling / marketing. The customer's desire is to not be bothered until they want to have a serious conversation. This gets into, marketing qualified leads versus sales qualified leads. Marketing has a very bad tendency to rush to calling something an MQL because someone downloaded an ebook. That doesn't mean they want to buy your widget. It means they wanted the ebook. So when sales calls that person that isn't ready to have a buying discussion, they create a negative. We're doing more harm than good because we're trying to fulfill our needs, and we have to try to fulfill our customers' needs. So I think, yes, you do want to drive them to a spot, whether it's they follow your company on LinkedIn, they follow your people on LinkedIn, they give you their email address for whatever reason, you create a Slack community for your industry. But we need to chill out and just let people do what they want to do. We can't trick someone in B2B. You can trick someone into buying a pair of socks. You can't trick them into buying an ERP system.
Right.
Right? Like it doesn't work that way.
Come spend $250,000 on licenses plus $1 million implementation. It's all right. Well, it's there's one, and I'm going to get his name, pronounce it wrong because I always do, because I should go look this up because I find him so fascinating. There's a person, Tom, I think you say Biolu. He was a founder of Quest Nutrition, and now he has a program called Impact Theory University. And I've spent a decent amount of money on it. Not that this is more B2C, but still the philosophy holds. Like, so Impact Theory University is all about business and growth mindset and education. And so how do they provide tools to help people build great companies and things like that. I stumbled upon him, I think, on Instagram. And he puts tons of content out there that's actually meaningful, and it's free. Right? Because he's posting every day. He's posting snippets of his podcast. He's posting, all sorts of things. And I learned from him just because I'm on Instagram and he pops up into my feed. And then I'm sure one time he had some sort of, hey, we have a class coming up or something. And I was like, oh, what's that about? And then I went and looked at it. But the only reason I went and looked at it is because I felt like I already knew him over 3 or 4 months of following his content. And I assume some of those same principles can apply to B2B as well.
100%. This happened very quickly, but we recently switched like 6 weeks ago, our project management platform. We found one that combines, I'll give them, Teamwork is the platform we use, which combines time tracking and project management. We're using two separate platforms. And they did a webinar about value-based pricing back in May. And values-based pricing is the idea that you're not billing by the hours, but you're saying this is worth $30,000 or whatever. Easy to talk about, very hard to do, and very hard to rationalize to clients, especially in this day and age. But a very intriguing concept for me as I run my business. It was a great webinar. It was not salesy at all. When I got the recording of the webinar, passed it around to my management team and said, there's a lot of good information in here. We should talk about this as a team. And I said to our head of ops, and should we also check out Teamwork? So it was like one instance. And then we started going down the path and we made the switch. So like, to me, that was a very fresh example of awesome content marketing that was not about their product at all. It was actually, if you're doing value, and they talk about value-based pricing and the positives and the negatives. But they're selling time tracking. Right. So, which is antithetical, really. to strict value-based pricing. But they went out and they had a good panel, and it was a great conversation, and they didn't ram their product down your throat. And they weren't rushing to the sale, and that does take confidence, like Tom Bialu did with you. Like he's I'm sure, not sure, but I would guess that he's got a good book of business. His business is doing well. And so he's not the panicky person trying to sell something. He has confidence. He knows if he does these things, good things will happen. And he's got the flywheel rolling. It takes patience to get to the point where the flywheel is rolling. Because you need to post, if it's on LinkedIn or whatever, you need to post 3 times a week, 5 times a week, whatever it might be, to start to build up your personal brand, your company's brand, but more and more personal. We're focused more on individuals now than brands because, again, that's what LinkedIn favors. You need to have great conversations, not be salesy about it, state your opinions, get into debates, showcase your thinking. If you're selling consulting or marketing services, which depend very much on your quality of your thinking, people will disagree. That's okay. But you're putting a stake in the ground and letting everybody know that stake exists.
Absolutely. All right. Well, this has been a really good conversation, John. I would love to hear what 3 things you want to leave top of mind with the audience.
Be courageous in your marketing, but make sure the time is right. For B2B companies, let go of your obsession with website traffic. We talked a little bit about it in regards to SEO. It's not that important for you. And don't just follow the leader. Don't follow the leader, but don't follow the trendiest thing, is what I would say.
And don't follow the masses.
Right. Do be very considered in the way you go to market. And people tend to rush through strategy, rush through and say, and they get tactical, right? Should we do videos? I don't know, maybe, but let's figure out what the message is. And then let's figure out where the audience is and figure out the best way to connect them. It's not just rushing to video or TikTok or Instagram or whatever channel is not the answer, but that's what people tend to do.
Well, thank you for your insight, John. How can folks find out more about what you do or get in contact with you?
Sure. We'll create a page for your audience, scribewise.com/corporate CPR. And we'll have a couple of options for them there to contact us or to follow us or whatever they'd like to do. So scribewise.com/corporate CPR.
Excellent. And what about, where will your book be?
You can find it on Amazon. That's the only place you can get it, really, honestly. So, but you'll be able to get it through that page too, if you want to go to that link I just mentioned.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's been great.
And to our audience, until next time, keep your corporations healthy.